The Glypt were beings of stone and patience. Their lives unfolded over millennia, their thoughts as deliberate as the grinding of tectonic plates. From their ponderous perspective, the galaxy was a slow, majestic dance, and they were its most steadfast observers. Speed, to a Glypt, was a sign of triviality, of a mind not yet settled enough to appreciate the deep currents of existence. Their society valued the immense. The enduring mountains were their monuments, geological epochs their calendars. When their long-range sensors and slow-moving probes first registered the species known as humans, the Glypt catalogued them with a detached curiosity. These tiny bipedal organisms were a flurry of frenetic activity. They built, they fought, they changed their societal structures with bewildering rapidity, all on a timescale that a Glypt might barely register as a passing moment. Most puzzling to the Glypt, however, was the human fixation on what the Glypt termed lesser organisms. Humans formed intense, emotional bonds with a variety of creatures, dedicating significant resources to their care and well-being, creatures the humans called pets, or livestock. A Glypt Xenological Digest, a compilation of observations taking centuries to assemble, featured a short segment on this peculiar human-animal companionship. The tone was one of mild bemusement, questioning the utility of such an investment in beings clearly not of their own kind, and certainly not their intellectual or physical equals. It was a footnote, an oddity, in the grand, slow tapestry of galactic life. The Lithos beacon was an ancient Glypt exploratory vessel, a colossal shard of rock and crystal so vast it resembled a small, irregular moon. It moved through the void on a centuries-long survey mission, its crew as ancient and deliberate as the ship itself. Aboard, Geode Master Krell, an elder whose stony hide was fissured with the wisdom of ages, oversaw the mission. His apprentice, Pebbleshift Vaughn, younger by only a few millennia, absorbed the slow teachings, his own mind gradually taking on the deliberate rhythms of his species. Then the unforeseen. A ripple in the fabric of spacetime, a localized gravitic shear, a rare, unpredictable cosmic hiccup. For the Lithos beacon, it was a catastrophic event. Alarms, silent for decades, perhaps centuries, began to blare slow, deep resonating tones that vibrated through the very stone of the ship. The immense vessel, designed to withstand the slow erosion of eons, was caught, helpless, in the invisible current. It was pulled, inexorably, towards an uncharted planetary system, its trajectory a long, agonizing arc towards a vibrant, green world. The crash was not an explosion, but a slow-motion cataclysm, a mountain grinding its way across the landscape, carving a scar into the planet's surface before finally, shuddering, coming to rest. The world was called New Harmony by its inhabitants. It was a colony, the culmination of a generation's ship's long journey, now a thriving outpost of humanity. Life here was pragmatic, lived close to the land, a blend of old Earth ways and new planetary adaptations. The colonists of Providence, the main settlement, worked in synergy with their environment and the creatures they had brought with them. Genetically adapted Earth livestock, like the sturdy gigabison for hauling and the agile pteristids for transport, were integral to their lives. So too were the shepherd plus breeds, dogs of remarkable intelligence and loyalty, who were more partners than pets. Sarah, a young woman with sun-streaked hair and capable hands, was a rancher on the outskirts of Providence. Her constant companion was Pip, a border collie whose bright, knowing eyes missed little. Their bond was typical of New Harmony, a quiet understanding, a seamless partnership built on mutual trust and shared purpose. Humans provided care, shelter, and direction. The animals offered their strength, their senses, and an unwavering companionship. The Lithos beacon's descent was a spectacle of terror and awe for the colonists. A falling star that grew, a streak of fire that resolved into a colossal, dark shape, shaking the very ground as it carved its path across the horizon. When the tremors finally subsided, a pall of smoke and dust hung over the distant impact site. An expedition team was quickly assembled in Providence, not primarily a military force, though they were well armed, but a group equipped for aid and assessment. Sarah, with her knowledge of the outlying territories, and Pip, with his keen senses, were among them. They reached the crash site after a tense journey. The scale of the wreckage was breathtaking. The Glipt ship was a mountain range of shattered rock and twisted crystal, smoking and groaning as it settled. And then the Glipt themselves emerged. Krell, Vaughn, and a handful of other survivors moved with an almost geological slowness. Their forms were immense, towering over the human rescuers like ancient monoliths come to life. The humans, even with their vehicles and equipment, seemed like tiny insects skittering around the feet of giants. Initial communication was a clumsy affair of gestures, pointing, and hastily drawn pictograms in the dirt. Krell, the geode master, observed the small, bustling humans with a calm, analytical gaze, his ancient mind slowly processing this unexpected encounter. Vaughn, the apprentice, made his own silent, internal observations. He noted the humans' apparent physical fragility, their curious reliance on amplifiers, the tools and vehicles they used. Most perplexing was their interaction with the canine biomechanism, Pip. The creature operated with an alarming degree of autonomy, darting here and there, yet it always deferred to the commands and even the subtle gestures of the small human, Sarah. What truly baffled the Glipt, however, was the humans' immediate and obvious concern for their well-being. Despite the terrifying manner of the Glipt's arrival, these tiny beings were offering assistance, sharing water, and attempting to understand their needs. Such altruism towards complete, and frankly intimidating, strangers was a behavior the Glipt found difficult to categorize within their eons of experience. New Harmony, for all its pastoral beauty, harbored its own dangers. The most significant were the Nocturnes, apex predators that hunted in well-coordinated packs. They were sleek, shadow-fast creatures, their most disturbing feature being their bioluminescent eyes that only became visible in the deep twilight, appearing as floating, predatory embers in the darkness. The colonists had established defense perimeters around Providence and their outlying homesteads, and protocols for nocturne attacks were well rehearsed. But the creatures were cunning and a persistent threat, particularly to any isolated group. The crash of the Lithos beacon was an event that did not go unnoticed by the Nocturnes. The immense release of energy, the scent of alien life forms, and the disruption to the natural order drew them in. As dusk began to settle over the crash site, the first eerie howls echoed through the hills. Pairs of ghostly, glowing eyes began to appear, flickering at the edge of the firelight cast by the human camp, slowly encircling the temporary settlement near the Glipt wreckage. The Glipt, encased in their stony hides and relying on their sheer bulk, were initially dismissive of the threat. To their senses, the Nocturnes were little more than small, yapping scavengers, hardly a concern for beings who measured their strength in terms of geological resilience. Krell registered their presence as a minor irritant. Vaughn watched them with a detached curiosity, comparing them to some of the more persistent but ultimately harmless microfauna of their home system. Then, as full darkness fell, the Nocturnes attacked, not as a disorganized rabble, but as a calculated, flowing assault. And the humans, the tiny, fragile beings, did not scatter in terror. They did not freeze. Instead, they exploded into a whirlwind of coordinated, purposeful action that left the observing Glipt stunned into a new level of attention. Era, a whistle clenched between her teeth, moved with a focused intensity. Sharp, piercing calls and quick hand signals directed Pip and the other colony dogs. The canines became blurs of fur and fury, moving with a speed and intelligence that was terrifying to behold. They darted at the flanks of the attacking Nocturnes, their barks sharp and distracting, breaking up the pack's charges, herding the predators away from the vulnerable points in the human defense and fiercely guarding the human defenders. They were not just animals, they were furry, four-legged skirmishers. Other colonists, mounted on their powerful terror steeds, thundered into the fray. The beasts, bred for strength and agility, moved with a courage that seemed to mirror their riders. Armed with sonic emitters that sent Nocturnes reeling in confusion and kinetic pulse rifles that cracked like thunder, the mounted humans became mobile turrets, their animal partners responding instantly to knee pressure, shifts in weight, and urgent commands. It was in this chaos that Vaughn, the Glipt apprentice, witnessed something that irrevocably shifted his understanding. He saw Sarah, the small human, deliberately place her fragile body between a lunging Nocturne and her canine, Pip. A moment later, Pip, with a snarl that seemed too ferocious for its size, launched itself at the Nocturne, driving it back from the human. Later, amidst a lull in the fighting, Vaughn observed Sarah gently and expertly tending to a deep gash on a terror steed's flank. Her voice was soft, murmuring words the Glipt could not understand, but the emotion in her touch, the genuine distress in her posture as she cared for the wounded animal, was unmistakable, even to a being of stone. Krell, the Geode Master, watched the unfolding battle with the slow, deep processing power of his ancient mind. He saw the humans, physically insignificant against the Nocturnes, let alone against his own kind, orchestrating a complex, multi-species defense. He saw the animals, dogs, steeds, fighting not merely from instinct or simple conditioning, but with what could only be described as loyalty, a shared understanding of threat and objective, a partnership. The lesser organisms were not slaves, not mere tools. They were extensions of the human will, their natural capabilities amplified by an extraordinary bond of affection and trust. The humans were the calm, directing intelligence at the heart of a dynamic, fiercely effective biological fighting unit. Krell's gaze followed the flow of commands, a shouted word, a whistle, a gesture, and the immediate, precise responses from the animals. He saw the protective instincts that flowed both ways. Humans shielding their animals, animals fighting to protect their humans. Slowly, a new concept began to form in his ancient consciousness. Command, as humans practiced it, was not merely about issuing orders and expecting obedience. It was about fostering a connection, a symbiotic relationship so profound it could bridge the vast gulf between species, turning disparate life forms into a single, cohesive force. As the first light of dawn painted the sky, the Nocturne attack finally faltered, then broke. The remaining predators melted back into the forests, leaving behind a scene of hard-fought victory. The colonists were weary, some injured, and several of their animal partners bore wounds from the night's desperate battle. What struck the Glipt, Krell and Vaughn in particular, was the aftermath. The humans tended to their wounded animals with the same meticulous care and quiet concern they showed their own injured. There was no distinction. A dog with a gashed leg, a terror steed limping from a strained tendon. Each received attention, medication, and gentle, reassuring words. The Glipt were profoundly altered by what they had witnessed. The beings they had dismissed as trivial pets, or simple livestock, were in fact integral components of a remarkably sophisticated survival and combat strategy. This strategy wasn't based on superior technology in the Glipt sense, or overwhelming physical power, but on an emotional connection, a form of interspecies alliance the Glipt had never conceived of, let alone encountered. Vaughn, his stony features perhaps incapable of showing expression in a human sense, felt his internal world view crack and reform. He struggled to reconcile the human's diminutive physical stature with the sheer force, the sheer presence they could project through their animal partners. The Glipt word for mastery, which usually connoted the slow shaping of inanimate rock or the guidance of vast, slow processes, took on a new, unsettling, and far more dynamic meaning. Eventually, a Glipt rescue mission, summoned by a painfully repaired beacon on the Lythos Beacon, arrived. Their massive rescue ship dwarfed even the crashed Explorer. As the surviving Glipt prepared to depart New Harmony, Geode Master Krell paused before Sarah. He raised one colossal, rock-hewn hand, not in a human gesture, but in a slow, deliberate inclination of his upper torso, a Glipt sign of profound, measured respect. The official Glipt report on the New Harmony incident, compiled by Krell and Vaughn, caused unexpected ripples throughout the slow, deliberate networks of the Glipt collective. It detailed the crash and the successful rescue, of course, but it also contained a startling, extensive addendum, a re-evaluation of species 734, humans. It spoke not of their ephemeral nature or their puzzling hobbies, but of their highly advanced interspecies codependency and synergistic command capabilities. It described, in ponderous Glipt prose, the astonishing loyalty and combat effectiveness of human-animal units, driven by what Krell termed directed emotional resonance. The Glypt were not known for exaggeration or fanciful storytelling. Their reports were factual, meticulously observed, and took centuries to gain wide circulation. But traces of this particular report, perhaps through younger Glypt engaging with more garrulous species at distant trading posts, began to leak to the wider galaxy. Species that relied on brute force, technological dominance, or simple pheromonal control of lesser beings were particularly intrigued and deeply unsettled. The idea that the small, soft-skinned humans could inspire such ferocious loyalty and complex, coordinated action in creatures far stronger and faster than themselves was a paradigm shift. A new legend began to circulate among the stars, whispered in docking bays and data lounges. Humanity, the beings from Sol, began to acquire new, unofficial designations. The Alpha Commanders, some called them, or more poetically, the Pack Masters of Sol. Humanity's seemingly innocuous pets, their humble farm animals, were suddenly viewed by the wider galaxy with a new mixture of suspicion, respect, and a creeping sense of fear. Were these creatures truly just companions and laborers? Or were they the advance guard, the unassuming tendrils of a uniquely adaptable, emotionally potent human strategy for survival and influence? The galaxy, once dismissive, now watched humanity, and its animals with a very different and far more attentive gaze.